Hello everyone. Welcome back to Mr.Darkveil. Today we're covering 10 of the most disturbing true trucker stories ever sent in to this channel. Truckers sent these in, and these aren't campfire inventions. Too specific, too consistent, too unsettling to dismiss. We cross-checked the details, and they line up with dispatch logs. Here's a taste of what's coming. One driver still won't run a certain bridge crossing after dark, not because of what he saw, but because of how long it stayed level with his window before it broke off and vanished. Another was mid-shift in a whiteout so bad he couldn't see his own hood, describing something circling the cab for hours. And somewhere in that call, his voice changes, like he's not just talking about the storm anymore. And one confession opens with a man swearing he'll never repeat what happened to him on a stretch of desert highway, right before he does exactly that. 10 stories. 10 drivers who won't take those roads the same way again. Subscribe, turn the bell on, because this channel is about real, patient horror instead of cheap scares. Share your own story in the comments. Your experience could be the next one we bring to light. Kill the dome light. Let's begin. 11 miles. I know the number because I've done the math 100 times since. Usually around 3 in the morning when sleep won't come. The CB went dead silent for 11 miles before I saw anything, and by the time I understood what that silence actually meant, it was already too late to turn the truck around. I'd been running that stretch of coast for going on 16 years by then. Frozen seafood mostly, sometimes lumber, out of a little processing plant south of Port Orford, up through the Coast Range, and down into the valley. Everybody who's driven that road at night knows the fog doesn't roll in so much as it just arrives. All at once, like someone closed a door behind you. October, that year. Cold enough that my breath was fogging the windshield faster than the defrost could clear it. And I had a full reefer trailer behind me. 42,000 pounds of halibut packed in ice, running 2 hours behind schedule because of a scale house delay outside Bandon. The CB on that route is basically a lifeline. You've got the same 6 or 8 regulars every week. Guys you've never met in person, but you know their voices better than you know your own brothers. There was a guy who went by Cutter, drove for a produce outfit, always talking about his daughter's softball games. There was a woman, Diane, hauled propane, sharp sense of humor, always the first one to warn you about a fish and wildlife checkpoint. That night they were all on, same as always, same easy back and forth, until they weren't. It happened gradual enough that I almost missed it. Cutter was in the middle of a sentence about a carburetor problem, and he just stopped. Not signed off, not said goodnight, just stopped mid-word, like somebody had cut the wire. I figured static, dead zone. The mountains do that to a signal sometimes. But then Diane didn't come back either. Nobody keyed up, nobody said a word for 11 miles, and I know it was 11 because I watched the odometer the whole time. Because somewhere in my gut, I already understood that the silence itself was the warning, not whatever came after it. Around mile marker 14, I realized something else. I hadn't seen headlights coming the other direction in a long while, and I hadn't seen taillights ahead of me either. And on that road, even at 1 in the morning, that's not normal. There's always somebody, a log truck, a state patrol unit, somebody. I checked my mirrors out of habit and saw nothing behind me but my own trailer lights bleeding red into the fog. It was like the road had been cleared out in front of me and swept clean behind me, and I was the only thing moving in 50 miles of coastline. That's when I saw it cross. My high beams caught it maybe 80 yards ahead, right where the road bends around the old slide area. My first thought, and I'll be honest about this because I think it matters, my first thought was elk, because that's what you train yourself to think out here. But elk don't stand up. This thing was upright, walking on 2 legs the way a man walks, except a man doesn't cover 2 lanes of highway in a stride and a half, and a man isn't 7-8 feet of shoulder from the ground. It didn't run. It didn't flinch from the lights. It just crossed, unhurried, like it had all the time in the world, and I was the thing that didn't belong there. I stood on the brakes without deciding to. 42,000 pounds doesn't stop on a dime. And I felt the trailer start to walk behind me. That sick feeling of weight, wanting to keep going after you've already stopped wanting to. By the time I got the rig settled, the road ahead was empty again. Just fog, and my own exhaust curling up white in the headlights. I sat there a long moment with the engine idling, and then I did something I've never told most people. Something every trucking manual and every old-timer's advice says not to do on a road like that at night. I got out. I don't fully know why. I think some part of me needed it not to be real, needed tracks that weren't there, or tracks that were obviously deer, something I could laugh about at the next truck stop. I walked maybe 20 feet in front of the truck with my flashlight, and the cold hit me different than it should have. It was maybe 34 degrees. My own breath was coming out in thick clouds, and there in the beam of my flashlight, right at the edge of the gravel shoulder, was a print, not a hoof print, something wide and flat, 5 points at the front of it, pressed maybe 1.5 inches into the mud, deep enough that whatever made it wasn't light. And there was no breath fog hanging over it, no warmth rising off it into the cold air, the way it should if something alive had just stood there breathing. I've thought about that detail more than almost anything else. In cold like that, breath is the first thing you see. There wasn't any. I was crouched down staring at that print when the CB crackled back to life behind me in the cab. And it wasn't Cutter, and it wasn't Diane. It was a voice I didn't know, low, unhurried, a man's voice with a lot of gravel in it. He said, "You're at the grade, aren't you?" Not a question, really. I hadn't kept the mic keyed, hadn't said a word to anybody, and this man knew exactly where I was. I scrambled back into the cab and grabbed the mic and asked him who he was, and he ignored that entirely. He said, "Don't stop again. Get back in and drive. Don't look in your mirrors more than you have to, and whatever you do, don't flash your brights at it." Then the radio went back to static, and no matter what channel I tried after that, I couldn't raise him again. I drove. What else was there to do? And somewhere around mile marker 17, I made the mistake of checking my mirrors, and there were eyes back there, low to the ground at first and then not low at all, catching the red glow of my own taillights, pacing me. I sped up. The eyes kept pace. I slowed down, thinking maybe I'd misjudged the distance, and the eyes slowed exactly with me, staying the same distance back, no matter what my speedometer said, for 3 straight miles, until the road finally opened up near the summit, and whatever it was let the darkness take it back. I made it into the yard outside Reedsport a little before 3 in the morning, and I sat in that cab for 20 minutes before I could make my hands stop enough to fill out my log. I told myself I'd laugh about it by daylight. I did not laugh about it by daylight. I told the story once, carefully, to an old dispatcher named Wallace, who'd been running that same office since before I started driving. I expected him to needle me about it, tell me I'd been on the road too long, maybe suggest I get my eyes checked. He didn't. He just nodded slow, like I'd confirmed something he already suspected, and he told me there were rules the old drivers kept for that grade. Rules nobody wrote down, because nobody wanted it written down. Never stop on that stretch after dark, no matter what you think you see. Keep the CB on, even when it's dead air, because dead air means something is close, and you want to know the second it isn't dead air anymore. And never, under any circumstance, flash your brights at anything crossing the road, because more than one driver over the years had done exactly that, and never made a normal-sounding radio call again. That's when he told me about Denny Hoyt, log truck driver, ran that same grade back in the late 70s, went missing on a night with conditions almost identical to mine. Officially, the report said he'd pulled over with mechanical trouble, wandered off from his rig for reasons nobody could explain, and fallen from the old slide embankment. They found his boots 400 feet from the truck, laces still tied, like he'd stepped clean out of them, and they never explained that in any report I ever saw. The company called it an accident and moved on, because that's what companies do. But Wallace said none of the drivers who'd worked that route back then ever fully believed it. What really got under my skin, though, was what came after. Wallace told me, almost like it was nothing, that dispatch had been quietly rerouting loads around that grade after dark for years. Not officially, nothing you'd find written as policy. But if you looked at the old logs close enough, you'd see entries marked weather diversion on nights when the weather service showed clear skies for 100 miles. A whole informal agreement, drivers and dispatchers both, protecting each other from something none of them were willing to put a name to on paper. For a long stretch after that, I didn't run the grade after dark either. I found reasons. I asked for different routes. I told myself it was just good sense, nothing more. And for almost 4 years, that story worked well enough that I mostly believed it myself. Then, I got assigned to train a rookie driver, a kid named Aaron, sharp, eager, the kind who thinks every old-timer's caution is just superstition, dressed up as experience. We got caught by a washout on the inland detour during a bad November storm, and the only open road left that night was the grade. I remember standing at the payphone outside the yard, trying to talk dispatch into holding the load until morning, and dispatch telling me there was no morning to wait for. The fish had to move. So we drove it. I put myself in the seat, told Aaron to keep his hands off the wheel, and his mouth shut about anything he saw. And somewhere past that same slide, Ben the CB went quiet, the exact same way it had 4 years before. I watched Aaron's face go pale in the dash lights, and I knew he felt it too. That specific kind of quiet that isn't just an absence of noise. Nothing crossed the road that night. Nothing paced us in the mirrors. We made it through clean, and for about 6 hours, I actually believed we'd gotten lucky. Then in the morning, doing my pre-trip walk-around at the yard, I found the dent. Driver's side mirror bracket, bent inward at an angle no wind or branch could have managed, and below it on the door panel, a print pressed into the paint and grime, 5 wide points, spaced far too broad for any hand I'd ever shaken. Aaron saw it too, before I could say anything, and neither of us needed to explain it to the other. It wasn't until 2 days later, listening to the local radio while loading at the dock, that the last piece dropped into place and turned the whole thing over in my head. There'd been a slide, they said, a big one, right along that same grade. Sometime in the early hours of the morning we'd driven through, half the northbound lane gone, guardrail and all, dropped 40 feet down the embankment. The state crew figured it happened sometime between 2 and 4 a.m., based on the debris settling. That was almost exactly the window we'd passed through, going the speed I'd been driving, on a night I'd been too rattled to push the truck any faster than I had to. I've turned that timing over more times than I can count. If I'd been running normal speed, normal confidence, not white-knuckled and cautious the way that quiet always makes me drive, I think about where I would have been on that road when the shoulder gave way. I think about whether whatever kept pace with us that first time, whatever left prints too large, and breath that never showed in the cold, wasn't hunting me at all. I think about whether it was just making sure I stayed slow enough to still be alive by morning. I still won't run that grade after dark. 20-some years now, and it's the one route I'll trade shifts to avoid. The one story I've only told a handful of times because I know exactly how it sounds. But it isn't only fear anymore. Not the way it used to be. Some nights, I think about those eyes in my mirror, holding steady at the same distance for 3 miles, no matter what my speed did, and I wonder if I owe something to whatever was back there that I've never had a way to pay. I swore to my wife, hand flat on the kitchen table, that I would never open my mouth about this again. Not to her, not to my brother, not to the guys at the yard who still ask why I won't take a load anywhere near Chinley after dark. But 3 nights ago, I found tracks at the end of my own driveway, 800 miles from where this started, and something about seeing them there, that close to my kid's bedroom window, made me think, you should hear this from me, instead of finding out some other way. This was 6 years back. I'd just buried my father outside Round Rock, and I was hauling myself home alone on 191, sometime after midnight, headlights, and nothing else, for 40 miles at a stretch. Out there, the phone doesn't work, so guys like me keep a CB running, just to have something other than our own thoughts in the cab. My dad was the one who taught me how to use it, actually, back when I was 14, and thought trucking sounded like freedom. He had a handle he used for 30 years, hauling feed and equipment around the reservation, something only family and a couple of old friends would ever have heard him say into a mic. I hadn't thought about that handle in years. About mile marker 27, I saw something standing at the shoulder that made me lift my foot off the gas without deciding to. It looked like a coyote at first, that low, rangy build, that color, except it was standing up on 2 legs, like a man waiting for a bus, and as my headlights swept over it, it lifted one arm and waved me down. Slow, deliberate, the way you'd flag somebody you knew. I told myself it was a guy in a costume messing with truckers, some kid's idea of a joke, and I almost feel stupid saying that now, but that's genuinely what went through my head, because the alternative didn't fit anywhere I wanted to put it. I slowed down, maybe 50 yards out, trying to get a better look through the glare, and when I glanced in my side mirror to check the road behind me, the shoulder was empty. No figure, no movement, nothing. I looked back at the mile marker just to be sure I hadn't imagined it, and that's when 3 knocks landed on my passenger door, right at the window, close enough that the whole cab shook a little on its springs. I put my foot down and didn't look at what was knocking. I didn't want to know how something can cross 60 feet of open desert in the 2 seconds it takes a man to check a mirror. I drove faster than I should have on a road with no shoulder markings and no guardrails, and to keep myself steady, I grabbed the CB mic and started talking into it, calling out to anybody running that channel, just wanting a human voice to answer back. Nobody did. What came back instead was static, and underneath the static, a voice that called me by the nickname only one man on earth ever used for me, and that man was in the ground 11 hours. Dad's voice. My dad's voice. Thin and stretched, like it was coming through a bad connection from somewhere much farther than the next mile marker, said my name, the way he used to when I was a boy who wouldn't come in for dinner. Then it asked me to pull over. Then it asked me to let it in. I want to be honest about what I did next, because I've turned it over in my head 1,000 times since. I didn't hang up the mic. I keyed it, and I said, "Dad," out loud into that static, because some part of me, the part that had watched them lower him into red dirt that same morning, wanted so badly for it to be true that I answered anyway. I tested it, though, before I let myself believe anything. I asked it something nobody but my father would know, a detail about a broke-down water pump out past his place, that we never told another living soul we'd fixed wrong and just left. The voice answered correctly. Every detail. That's when the fear stopped being the kind you feel watching a scary movie and became the kind that sits in your chest like a stone, because a stranger can't know that story, and neither can an animal, and I was completely alone on that road. Somewhere around mile marker 31, I remembered something my grandmother used to say when we were kids, and got too curious about what walked around out there at night. She never used the word for it straight out. She'd get quiet and just call it that which walks. And she told us it can't come inside a place, a car, a home, anywhere you've closed against it, unless you invite it. She said it likes to wear the voices of people you loved and lost, because grief opens doors that fear alone never could. And she said the worst thing you can do, worse than running, worse than looking straight at it, is answer it back with recognition. Saying a name is an invitation. Saying Dad is an invitation. I'd already said it, out loud, into the mic, into whatever was listening on the other end of that static. I didn't have time to sit with how bad that felt before the truck lurched. One hard jolt, like I'd hit a pothole at 70, except there was no pothole on that stretch. I know that road. I pulled over eventually, hands shaking too bad to keep driving straight, and when I got out with a flashlight to check my tires, I found 4 claw marks raked down the driver's side door, starting at the mirror and dragging all the way to the handle, like something had been holding on. I got back in fast and locked both doors, which felt useless and necessary at the same time, and that's when I remembered my phone, sometimes caught one bar right past the trading post, a few miles up. I called my brother, more to hear something real than because I thought he could do anything from 300 miles away, and he picked up groggy, annoyed, said my name, asked what was wrong. We talked maybe 10 seconds before his voice on the other end slid, right in the middle of a sentence, into that same static thin register my dad's had used, still using my brother's words, my brother's rhythm, but wrong underneath it, like a recording playing half a second behind itself. I hung up right there and didn't call again, because I no longer knew, and still don't fully know, whether that was ever my brother at all, or something that had been listening on the line the whole time, waiting to see which voice I'd trust. The trading post came up on my right a few minutes later, lit by one buzzing security light, and I pulled in shaking, telling myself a building with people in it had to be safer than an empty highway. The night clerk, was somebody I actually knew a little. A woman named Etta, who used to sell my dad chew and coffee every Friday, for as long as I could remember. She was standing behind the counter when I walked in, and she smiled at me and said my father's name, said it warm, said he was just in here, which was impossible. On every level a sentence can be impossible. And she kept smiling, that same exact width, the whole time she said it, not blinking, her hands flat on the counter, not moving at all. I backed out of that store without buying anything, without saying much of anything back to her, because I understood in that moment that I no longer had any way to know, looking at a person's face, whether I was looking at a person. Somewhere in the panic of getting back on the road, a memory surfaced that I'd buried a long time, on purpose. My father had a heart attack. That's what the coroner in Chinley wrote down, alone on this exact stretch of 190, pulled over on the shoulder with the engine still running and the CB mic still in his hand, found the next morning by a rancher checking fence. Nobody in the family ever said the other word out loud, but I remembered now, sharp as if it happened that afternoon. My uncle standing at the wake, telling my aunt in a low voice that Dad had been talking for months about something waving at him from the mile markers on his night runs. Something he swore was following the same route he ran twice a week hauling feed. Nobody believed him. I certainly didn't. Not until I was living the exact same night he must have lived. That put a different shape on everything. This wasn't random, and it wasn't only mine. It had already taken one of us on this road, and it was patient enough to wait for the sun to make the same drive. There's a cattle guard about 4 miles before the reservation line, where 191 crosses onto state land. Steel rails set into the road, and my grandmother's old rule came back to me whole in that moment, that whatever walks doesn't cross open metal and running water, that it has to stop at a boundary, unless you're foolish enough to open a door for it first. I had 11 miles to make in a truck that had already taken one impossible hit, and I put my foot all the way down and didn't look at the mirrors again, no matter what I heard scraping along the side panel. And there was scraping, low and rhythmic, keeping pace with a vehicle doing 80 on a road built for 55. About a mile out from the cattle guard, the passenger door handle clicked, once, like somebody outside testing it, and for one full second before I forced my eyes back to the road, I caught something in the side mirror that I have never once described the same way twice when I've tried, because my mind keeps trying to make it smaller than it was. What I'll say is this: it wasn't running on 4 legs anymore, and it wasn't quite standing like a man either, and its face did the thing my father's voice had done on the radio. It was almost right, built out of a shape that was trying hard to be something I'd trust, and failing at the last half-inch of it in a way that made my whole body go cold at once. I hit that cattle guard doing close to 90, felt the tires drum across the rails, and everything behind me, the scraping, the door handle, all of it, just stopped, the way a sound stops when you step out of a room. I didn't slow down for another 20 miles. I never told my father's family the whole thing, only pieces, only enough that my uncle nodded once, like it confirmed something he already suspected, and never brought it up again. I stopped driving that route at night. I moved eventually, took a regional job that keeps me on paved highways with cell coverage and rest stops every 50 miles. And for 6 years, that was enough distance to convince myself it had stayed back there, on that stretch, tied to that road, the way my grandmother always said, these things are tied to a place. Then 3 nights ago, I let the dog out around 11 and found 4 claw marks raked into the wood of my own back porch step, starting wide at the top and dragging down to a point, the same spacing, the same depth, as the ones down the door of a truck I sold years ago and never think about anymore. And this morning, driving my son to school, we passed the county mile marker at the edge of our subdivision, the ordinary green sign with the ordinary number on it, and for just a second, half a breath, I thought I saw something standing beside it on 2 legs, still as a fence post, one arm raised like it was waiting for me to slow down and remember its voice. I haven't answered it. I want to be very clear with you and with myself that I have not said a single word back, but I understand now that distance was never the thing keeping it away, and neither was time, and I don't actually know what is, and that not knowing is the reason I'm telling you this instead of keeping my promise to my wife. If it comes through the radio in my truck, or through the phone, or through the mouth of somebody I love calling my name in a voice that's almost right, I need at least one other person to know the rule going in, because I only remembered it after I'd already broken it once, and I am not going to make the mistake of thinking I get to be the one who forgets twice. And I'm telling you, it's circling again. Denise, it's circling the truck right now. I can hear its feet in the snow. The line crackled. That fine, broken hiss you only get when a cell signal is barely holding on to one bar in the middle of nowhere. And under it you could hear him breathing. Fast. Shallow. Like a man trying not to be heard by something close by, even though he was inside a locked cab. Dale, I need you to stay calm for me, okay? Just keep talking. Tell me exactly what you're seeing. It's tall. It's too tall, Denise. 6 foot. Maybe more. But it's bent over wrong. Like its knees don't sit right. And it's got antlers. But they're not clean like a buck's. They're all cracked and yellow. And there's stuff hanging off them. Moss or hide. I don't know. And it's not eating anything. It's not foraging. It's just walking around my truck in a circle. Slow. Like it's checking something. Could it be a moose, Dale? Sometimes in a whiteout the shapes get distorted. The snow plays. No. Moose don't stop and turn their head at you. Moose don't stand still and look right at your windshield for a full minute. This thing looked at me, Denise. It knows I'm in here. He'd been stuck since a little after 8, he told her, when the storm rolled off the lake faster than the radio said it would and swallowed the road whole. 1 second he had his high beams cutting 60 yards of white in front of the rig. The next, he had 6 feet of visibility and a wall of snow the wipers couldn't keep up with. He missed the bend where the logging spur cut off the main haul road, felt the back tires lose the gravel shoulder, and went nose first into a drainage ditch packed with 3 feet of fresh powder. The engine still ran. That was the only mercy. But the heater had started coughing an hour ago. Little hitches in the airflow that told him the fuel line was icing. And every time he cracked the door to check the exhaust pipe for snowpack, the cold came in, like a hand around his throat. Rescue's going to be a while, Dale. I'm not going to lie to you. County's got 1 plow truck working your stretch and it's crawling. We're looking at 2 hours minimum, maybe 3. I don't have 3 hours if that thing decides to stop walking in circles. He said its ribs showed. That was the detail that stuck with her, she'd tell people later. Not the antlers, not the height, but the ribs. He described them like the flank of a horse that had been left out all winter. Hide pulled so tight over bone you could count each one in the truck's running lights. An animal, starving that badly, doesn't have the strength to pace a vehicle for an hour straight. It should have been down. It should have been dead. Instead, it kept a slow, patient loop around the cab, and every so often, it would stop directly in his eye line and tilt its head, almost curious, almost listening, the way a dog tilts its head at a sound it's trying to place. Denise, I need to tell you something, and I need you to not think I'm losing it. Go ahead, Dale. This spot, mile marker 12, past the Second Creek crossing, the spur that splits off before the old Hendrickson cut. I know this stretch. I've hauled this stretch my whole life. This is where my brother went off the map. 6 years ago, November. Warren. He went out for the late bow season, and he never came back to the truck. And they searched 4 days and found his rifle and 1 boot, and that was it. This is the same 3 miles of woods, Denise. I didn't miss this turn by accident. I don't think I did anyway. I've been telling myself for 6 years I'd never come back out here after dark, and here I am, sitting in the same ditch probably, for all I know. There was a pause on her end long enough that he asked if she was still there. When she came back, her voice had changed, gone quieter, like she'd set something down. I remember that case, Dale. I took the first call on it. I was on shift the night your dad phoned in, that Warren hadn't come back to the truck by dark. I remember the search got called off on day 4 because a system came through just like this one, and command said continuing to send men out in that weather to look for a man who was probably already gone wasn't worth losing a second person over. I've thought about that call for 6 years. I didn't know it was your brother till just now. I didn't put the name together. That admission did something to him worse than the cold had. She heard it in how his breathing changed. Quicker, wetter. I got my flashlight on the passenger window. Denise, there's a tree right at the edge of where my lights reach, and there's something carved into it. Letters. I can see W and H. That's what my dad carved into a birch out here, the year Warren went missing. WH. So if he ever wandered back to a road, he'd see his own initials and know he was close to somewhere safe. But Denise, that carving on that tree looks fresh. The bark around the cuts isn't gray. It isn't weathered. It looks like it was cut this year, maybe this month. Are you sure it's the same tree, Dale? Storms move markers. Snow can make an old cut look. I'm sure. I helped my dad carve it. I know my own brother's initials. The static thickened right after that. The kind of interference that isn't weather, more like something moving between the phone and whatever tower it was bouncing off. And underneath the hiss, faint, distorted, there was a sound that took him a second to place. And when he did place it, his voice went up half an octave. It just said something. Denise, did you hear that? It made a sound, and it wasn't a growl. It sounded like it said my name. It sounded like Dale. Animals don't do that, Dale. I need you to. I know animals don't do that. She told him then, because she didn't know what else to give him except the truth, that her own father had worked 40 years at the mill outside Ely, and used to talk about the old stories the Ojibwe guides told the loggers back when the camps first went in, about something in these woods that had once been a man and wasn't anymore, something the cold and the hunger had hollowed out, until all that was left, wearing the shape of a person, was appetite, and that the old guides said it would call to you in a voice you trusted, because a voice you trusted was the only bait that worked once you were smart enough to stay in your truck. She said she didn't know if she believed it. She said she'd never had a reason to think about it seriously until tonight. And there's more, Dale, and I don't know if I should tell you this right now, but I think you need to hear it. Yours isn't the first call we've logged off that stretch. There've been 4 others going back 11 years. 2 hunters, a survey crew guy, and a trucker hauling for the same outfit you work for. Every one of them describes something close to what you're describing. 2 of those calls just stopped, mid-sentence. No goodbye, nothing, and we never found the callers. County never made a public thing of it because there was never a body, never proof, and nobody wants that story attached to a logging road that puts groceries on people's tables. But it's in the log, Dale. It's real. You are not the first man to sit in that spot and say these words to me. He didn't answer for a while. When he did, his voice had gone strange, slower, and he said something that made the hair go up on her arms even 600 miles away in a warm dispatch office. Denise, what time is it on your end? It's 9:52. Dale, that can't be right. I looked at my dash when that thing first started circling, and it said 9:40. I've been talking maybe 20 minutes since then. Are you telling me I've been on this phone for 3 hours? The log start time on this call is 6:47 p.m. Dale, he made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite crying, and told her his hands had gone numb enough that he wasn't sure he'd feel it if he dropped the phone. Then he said there was something sitting on the hood of the truck, right up against the windshield, where the wipers had cleared an arc, and it hadn't been there a second ago. It's Warren's thermos, Denise. The green one. Dad bought us matching ones. I've got mine at home in the cupboard right now. I know I do. This one's got the same dent in the side from where he dropped it off the tailgate. It's sitting right there on my hood. Something set it there. Something put it there for me to see. That's when the shape came all the way into the reach of his headlights for the first time, close enough that the beams caught it full instead of just the edge, and he stopped talking mid-word. Denise, its face. Talk to me, Dale. I can see its face, and it's got his jaw. It's got Warren's jaw, that crook he had on the left side, from when he broke it playing hockey in high school. The rest of it isn't right. The rest of it is wrong. In every way a person can be wrong. But that jaw is my brother's jaw, and I would know it anywhere. I grew up looking at that face across a kitchen table for 18 years. There was no version of the next silence that didn't feel unbearable on her end. 60 seconds of him breathing, and nothing else. And she kept saying his name until he answered. And when he did, he wasn't screaming, which somehow scared her more than screaming would have. It's not coming for the door, Denise. It looked at me and it looked at the thermos, and it just stood there. And now it's backing off. It's walking backward into the snow, away from the truck, and it's not taking its eyes off me. Denise, I think it's leaving. I don't understand why it's leaving. Stay in the truck, Dale. Don't you dare open that door. I'm not opening the door. The back tires. I can feel the truck rock. Something's pushing at the back of the frame. I don't know if it's the wind or... The transmission went to static there. A full block of it. 31 seconds by the county's own timestamp. And when his voice came back through, it was smaller. Wrung out. Saying only that the truck had come free of the ditch on its own. That the wheels had caught gravel he hadn't been able to find for hours. And that the far tree line, the one with his father's carving on it, was empty now. No shape, no antlers. Nothing but snow filling in where something had stood. The plow reached him at 5:20 that morning. First gray light coming up over the spur, and found the rig sitting half in the road, with the engine dead from an empty tank. Dale alive inside it. Hypothermic, but alive. Wrapped in a jacket he didn't remember putting on. On the hood, melted into a ring in the fresh snow, like it had sat there radiating some leftover warmth, was a thermos with a dented side. The tree with the carving stood 40 yards off, and when they checked it in daylight, the cuts were fresh enough to still smell of green wood, though nobody could say when they'd been made, or by whose hand. It was 3 weeks later, going back through the recording for the incident report, that Denise noticed something in the waveform during that 31-second static break. A second voice, sitting underneath Dale's breathing, that the call itself had never carried to her ear in real time. She had it cleaned up by a friend who did audio work for the sheriff's department, and what came out, thin and warped but unmistakable once you knew to listen for it, was 2 words repeated 3 times in a voice that matched, syllable for syllable, the archived recording of a call logged 6 years earlier from the same 3 miles of road, a call that had come in from a hunter's cell phone the night before a search was called off, after 4 days in weather just like this. The words were the same both times, spaced the same, time to the same static. Go home, go home, go home. And when she pulled the file to compare the 2 waveforms side by side, the timestamps overlapped down to the second, as if 2 calls made 6 years apart had, for 31 seconds, been the exact same call. I didn't see it until it was already flying next to my window at 70. I'd run that stretch of I-77 along the river before Point Pleasant, more times than I could count, hauling produce down out of Ohio, and there's a long 2-lane bridge out there that always tightens my hands on the wheel a little, for no reason I could ever point to. Just an old habit my body learned before my head ever caught up to it. It was pushing 11 at night, thermos empty, radio down low, and I was thinking about my daughter's school picture day the next morning, when something was just there, not ahead of me, beside me, level with the driver's door, holding my speed like it had been pacing the truck a while, and only just decided to let me notice. 2 circles of red caught my headlight spill, and threw it straight back at me, brighter than any reflector has a right to be, and under those eyes was a shape too big for anything I had a name for in the half-second I got to look at it. Wings, I want to say, but wings that didn't move like a bird's, more like a coat caught in a hard wind. I cut the wheel without deciding to. The trailer fishtailed. Gravel kicked off the shoulder, and by the time I had the rig straightened out and my heart back down out of my throat, whatever it was had peeled off the second my tires hit blacktop on the far side of the bridge, gone into the dark over the water, like it had never matched pace with 60,000 pounds of steel at all. I got onto the shoulder about a quarter mile past the bridge, hazards on, hands shaking bad enough that I dropped my phone twice trying to call it in. I had a cheap dash cam clipped to the visor, the kind that's supposed to save your neck in a claim, and for once in 8 years of driving, I'd actually had it running that night, only because a trailer light had gone out, and I wanted proof it worked fine when I left the yard. I sat there and scrubbed back through the footage, looking for something that would let me put a name to what I'd just seen. There was something, right at the edge of the frame, a blur crossing from the tree line to the guardrail, and gone in 4 frames flat. Too fast and too dark to be more than a smear of gray against gray. Not nothing, but not proof either. That gap between what my body knew it had seen and what the camera would admit to sat worse in my stomach than if the footage had shown nothing at all. I called it in anyway, because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Denise, our night dispatcher, picked up already sounding tired of me before I got a word out, and when I finally got half the story past my teeth, she cut me off. Told me to hold on. Told me Charlie Pruitt had called in 20 minutes before me. Same bridge, same direction, describing a big animal on the guardrail with eyes that lit up red in his lights, and she hadn't wanted to write that down looking the way it looked. Two of us, 20 minutes apart. Neither one of us knowing the other had called until she said so. That sat worse in me than the sighting itself. One man seeing something at night can talk himself out of it by morning. Two strangers calling in the same thing off the same 100 yards of road isn't the kind of coincidence that lets you sleep. I pulled into the truck stop outside Point Pleasant instead of pushing on to the drop. Told myself I just wanted coffee. Knew the truth was, I didn't want to be alone with it yet. There was an old man on a stool at the counter, the kind of regular who'd been sitting on that same seat through 2 changes of ownership. And when the waitress asked what had me looking so pale, I told her, quieter than I meant to, expecting her to laugh. The old man didn't laugh. He set his coffee down slow and asked exactly where on the bridge. And when I told him, he nodded like I'd only confirmed something he'd had settled in his head for 40 years. Said his daddy used to talk about that same stretch, red eyes and a big gray shape, all through the fall of '66 into '67. Said his daddy quit driving that road at night altogether, months before the old bridge dropped into the river with people's cars still on it. I'd heard of the Mothman the way you hear of any local legend. A shirt in a gas station rack, a museum I'd never once walked into. I hadn't known it came with a body count and a date attached. I looked it up that night from a motel bed I couldn't make myself lie down in, and the numbers were worse than the old man had made them sound. 46 people died when the Silver Bridge came down in December of 1967. Cars and a school bus dropping into the Ohio River in the middle of rush hour. And in the year leading up to it, more than 100 people in that county had reported the same thing I saw. Red eyes and a wingspan too wide for anything they could name. Nobody ever proved the sightings had a thing to do with the bridge failing. A single steel eye-bar with a flaw in it had done that. Plain fatigue. A crack too small to see growing for decades, until it finally let go. But the sightings stopped completely, the week the bridge fell. Like whatever had been showing up was finished, with whatever it came to do. I read that at 2 in the morning and did not feel one bit better for knowing it. I asked dispatch to keep me off that run a while, and Denise did, for about 9 days, until a scheduling hole put me right back on it, because nobody else could cover the load. My wife wasn't thrilled about it either, kept asking if I could just take the long way around through Ohio even if it cost us the extra hour, and I kept telling her I couldn't afford to turn down miles over a feeling. In those same 9 days, I wasn't the only one hearing things anymore. 3 other drivers out of our yard had shaky clips up on their phones, all from that same stretch of river. A local station ran a piece, calling it a cluster. First sightings in that county since the '60s, and people started parking on the shoulder at night, with their brights aimed at the tree line, treating the thing that had nearly put me in a guardrail like a carnival ride. That scared me almost as much as the eyes had. Something quiet for 60 years doesn't start showing itself to half a dozen strangers in 1 month, for no reason at all. It was a woman named Sarah Kessler who finally gave the fear something to stand next to, instead of just something to run from. She found me through the comments under that news clip, said she was a structural inspector who'd grown up in Point Pleasant, granddaughter of a man who'd lost his brother on the Silver Bridge, and she wanted to talk to every driver who'd seen something, not for a ghost story, for a reason she wouldn't get into over the phone. We met at that same truck stop. She had a folder with her, state inspection records from 8 months back, flagging active corrosion on 2 support sections of the newer bridge, the one built to replace the one that fell. The report had gone in, gotten stamped for follow-up, and then sat behind a budget freeze ever since. One boring maintenance item among 100 others filed the same way every year. She wasn't telling me a monster had done anything. She was telling me the bridge itself had a problem. Nobody with the authority to fix it had bothered looking at twice. What she showed me next is what took the fear out of my chest and put it somewhere colder. She'd mapped every sighting from that last month, mine and Charlie's and the others, against the inspection diagram of the bridge. Every single one landed within 100 feet of that same corroded support section, night after night, driver after driver, with no way of knowing where the county's own paperwork said the weak point was. It wasn't scattered across the span at random. It was sitting right on top of the one spot the state already knew, on paper, had a problem. I asked her what she thought it meant, and she said she didn't know yet, and I believed her, because she looked like a woman who wanted an answer more than she wanted a story to tell. 2 nights later, she called me close to midnight, and she didn't sound like a woman with an answer. She sounded like a woman with a new question. She'd gone out to the support section that day with a maintenance crew and found a corroded relay on one of the beacon lights bolted to the truss, the kind meant to blink steady for barge traffic on the river, and the bad wiring was making it glow instead of flash, a dull red pulse coming and going with how much current the failing line let through. That explained some of what a driver might catch sideways at 70 miles an hour, a red glow low on the steel, where no light should sit still. It didn't explain what I'd seen fly, didn't explain a shape holding pace with my door for longer than any dead light bolted to a beam ever could. We had one piece now instead of none, and somehow one piece without the rest of the picture felt worse than nothing to go on at all. Sarah took the corrosion report and the sighting map in front of the county the next week, and the men whose job it was to listen thanked her and ran the numbers on a full closure instead, weighed against the cost of rerouting freight and school buses and every commuter crossing that river twice a day, and decided the corrosion didn't meet the bar for emergency action. Scheduled a repair crew for the following quarter. I sat in the back of that meeting because Sarah asked me to, and watched grown men in county polos make the same call, in the same tone, that got made about the old bridge back in the fall of 1967. Not urgent. Not yet. I'd read enough by then to know exactly how that sentence had ended the last time somebody said it. It was Charlie Pruitt who turned it into something real, for everybody who hadn't wanted to listen to a corrosion report. 3 weeks after that meeting, hauling coiled steel across that same span around 2 in the morning, the expansion joint under his rear axle dropped just enough to open a gap that shouldn't have existed, snapped 2 tie-down chains, and came within what the trooper on scene told me was maybe a foot of putting 60,000 pounds of steel through the guardrail and into the water. Charlie walked away with a broken wrist and a look on his face I'd never seen on a grown man before. Nobody blamed a creature for that. Everybody who'd sat in that county meeting 3 weeks earlier understood exactly what had almost happened, and exactly why. The county shut the bridge within 6 hours of Charlie's accident. No quarterly schedule about it anymore. And the emergency crew that went over every inch of that span found a primary support cable at the weak section down to less than a third of its rated strength, close enough to failing that the lead inspector said on camera that a few more weeks of freight at that load could have taken the whole span the same way the old one went in 67. 46 people died the first time because a crack nobody could see grew quiet for decades until it gave all at once. This time, it didn't get the chance. They closed it, they fixed it, and every driver in that county got to go home to people who never had to read about them in a paper. They reopened the bridge 4 months later, and I drove it again the first week it was back, because a man can't build a career out of avoiding roads. About halfway across, my headlights caught something lifting off the new guardrail. Wide wings unfolding slow, the way nothing panicked ever moves. And for 1 full second, my hands went tight on the wheel, the exact same way they had that first night. Then it banked out over the water, and I saw it clean in the spill of my brights. A barn owl bigger than any owl has business being, close to a 5-foot spread, the kind that nests in the gaps of old steel where nothing bothers it. Its eyes threw my headlights straight back red, the way any owls will if you catch them right, and it peeled off toward the tree line the exact same way that first shape had peeled off the night I nearly put my rig in a guardrail. Sarah told me later the crews had found an owl's nest tucked into the very section of truss that had been failing, right where every sighting that month had clustered, and her best guess, the only one she'd put her name to, was that the bird had been getting flushed out of that nest for weeks by vibration in a cable that was quietly coming apart underneath it. Sound and stress, traveling through failing steel, long before any gauge on a clipboard ever picked it up. An owl can't read a corrosion report. It just knows when the thing it's sitting in stops feeling right. I think about that more than I think about the eyes, if I'm honest. That a bird spooked out of a dying bridge is the reason a county finally looked twice at a piece of steel that was about to do to us what it did to 46 people back in 1967. I still run that route. I still don't take my eyes off that guardrail when I cross. And some nights, I catch myself hoping I see those red eyes one more time. Because the last time I did, it ended up saving every driver who's crossed that bridge behind me since. I want this on record, exactly as it happened. In order. Not what I think it means. Not what my wife thinks it means. Just what happened. The way it happened. Starting from when I left the mill. I got off shift at 11. Second shift. Same as I've run for 6 years now. Same drive home. Every single night. Same 41 minutes door to door. If the lights in Hurley are with me. I take US 2 West out of town. Cut down onto the county road. Just past the old Sinclair station that's been boarded up since I was in high school. And I run that stretch for about 9 miles before I hit my own driveway. I have driven that road more times than I could count for you if you gave me all night. I know where the frost heaves are. I know where the deer come down off the ridge in October. I was not tired. I had 1 cup of coffee at 10 and nothing since. I want that written down too, because I know what people ask first. About 4 miles in, right past the creek bridge, I caught something moving in my headlights off to the right, down in the ditch grass. My first thought was deer, because that's always your first thought out there, and I eased off the gas out of habit, the way you do. But it didn't dart. It didn't bolt across in front of me the way a deer does when it panics. It just kept pace, down low in the grass, moving parallel to my truck. I remember thinking, that's a big dog. Somebody's dog is loose, and feeling annoyed, more than anything, because loose dogs get hit on that road all the time, and I didn't want to be the one who hit it. Here's the first thing that made my stomach turn over, and I want to be precise about it. I looked at my speedometer. I was doing 45. I always do 45 on that stretch. There's a bend coming, and I know it in my sleep. That animal was holding 45 with me, not gaining on me, not falling back, not surging the way an animal does when it's actually trying to catch something or actually trying to get away from something. It was pacing me, like it had checked my speed and matched it, and now it was just going to stay there. So I tested it. I know how that sounds now, but at the time it felt like the only sane thing to do. Prove to myself I was wrong. I pressed down and took it up to 50, then 55. I watched that ditch the whole time. It came with me. Not scrambling, not stretching out like a dog at a dead sprint with its tongue out and its legs throwing everything they had. It adjusted, smooth, like it had been waiting for me to do exactly that. That's when I looked at how it was actually moving. And this is the part I still argue with myself about, because I only had the edge of my headlights and the dash glow to see it by. At 45, it ran low, on 4 legs, the way a big animal runs. But when I slowed for the bend and dropped to maybe 35, it came up, rose up onto 2 legs, and jogged upright for maybe 8 or 10 strides. Easy, no stumble, before I picked speed back up, and it dropped back down onto 4. It wasn't struggling to figure out how to move. It looked like it was choosing. I grabbed my phone off the seat right about then, more out of reflex than any plan, thinking I'd call my brother-in-law who lives out that way, just to say something out loud to another person. No bars. Not low signal, no bars at all. And that road has never been perfect, but I have never lost it completely. Not in 6 years. I hit the radio instead, and the classic rock station I always have on, cut to static, right as I did it, right at the same mile marker, like it wasn't a coincidence, so much as a boundary I'd crossed. I want to tell you about the not looking, because that's the detail that's stuck with everybody I've told this to, and it's true, but it's not the whole truth. The whole time, however fast or slow I went, it never turned its head toward my truck. Never once, the entire time I could see it, did I get a look at its face straight on. I told myself that was almost a comfort. Then, on the bend, I glanced at my side mirror instead of out the window, just to change what I was looking at, give my eyes a rest from it. And in that mirror, For maybe half a second, I saw its head turned, watching the truck, watching me, reflected. The second I moved my eyes back to the window, it was facing forward again, like nothing happened. It wasn't that it never looked, it was that it only let itself be seen looking, when it thought I wasn't watching back. I thought about Denny then, from the mill, and I want that in here too, because at the time, it felt important, and I think it still is. Couple years back, Denny hit something on that same stretch. Wouldn't say deer, wouldn't say what. Put in an insurance claim, and clammed up about it after. And guys ribbed him for a season about seeing Bigfoot, and he just took it, and never corrected anybody, and never explained. I always figured there was more to that story. Driving that night, I understood for the first time that there probably was. Somewhere past the 6-mile marker, I caught movement on my left too, and for a second I thought my eyes were doing something to me, doubling what was already there. They weren't. There was a second one, on the driver's side now, same pace, same 45, flanking me on both sides of the truck, like I was something being moved along a chute. That's when the whole shape of what was happening changed for me. Because a strange animal alone is one thing. A person can talk themselves into a dozen explanations for that. 2 of them, positioned, one on each side, holding the exact same speed independently of each other. That's not a stray. That's not a confused animal. That takes coordination. That takes 2 things agreeing on what they're doing. I looked hard at the one on the right, trying to find anything ordinary about it to hold on to, and that's when I saw the strip of orange caught around what would be its upper foreleg, or its wrist, whatever you want to call the joint on a thing built like that. Blaze orange. Torn. The kind that comes off a hunting vest. Not a collar. Not anything a person puts on a dog. A torn piece of fabric, wound and knotted, like it had gotten caught on something and never come loose. I did not let myself finish the thought about what that meant while I was still on that road. I let myself finish it later, at home, and I'll get to that. Right after the creek bridge, the second bridge, not the first one, there was a truck already pulled off on the shoulder, hazards going, driver door hanging open, headlights still on, and pointed out into the field like whoever had it just walked away from it running. No people. Not standing near it. Not in the cab. Not that I could see in the 2, maybe 3 seconds I had going past at speed. I did not stop. I want that said plainly, and I am not going to dress it up. I saw a truck sitting open on a dark road with 2 animals pacing mine on either side, and I made a decision in about a second and a half, and the decision was to keep my foot where it was. At the state line, you know the sign, the one that welcomes you into Wisconsin one way and Michigan the other. Both of them peeled off at exactly the same moment, straight back into the tree line, like they'd hit the edge of something they weren't going to cross, or didn't want to be seen crossing. 6 miles, near enough exactly, from where I first caught the one in the ditch grass to where they both broke off. I checked my odometer against the marker before I let myself breathe. I got home. My dog, old Lab, 60 pounds of nothing but pancakes and affection her whole life, would not come off the porch. Hackles up, staring past me at the tree line at the end of the driveway. Low growl I've heard out of her maybe twice before. Both times a bear had come through the yard. I had to pick her up and carry her in the house. And when I walked back out to grab my lunch cooler off the tailgate, I found 4 long scrapes in the dust and grime on the tailgate itself, at about hand height on a tall man, or shoulder height on something that runs on all 4s and stands up when it wants to. I never felt it touch the truck. Not once on that road did I feel a bump, a scrape, anything against the body of that vehicle. But something had reached it, at some point, close enough to leave a mark, and I never knew. I sat with all of that overnight, telling myself it was enough to just be a strange animal story, the kind you tell at the mill, and let people call you crazy over, and let it go at that. But I couldn't let it go, because of the truck on the shoulder with its door open. I kept seeing it. And this morning I called around, and I found out that a maroon F-150 matching what I saw was reported abandoned on that stretch 3 days before I drove past it. Driver door open, hazards on, nobody found. And I found out whose truck it was. It was my brother-in-law's, Dean's. He's been listed missing since the Tuesday before I drove that road, and nobody had told me yet, because his sister didn't want to worry me at work, and I didn't put it together until I saw the make and the color come up on the news this morning and felt the floor go out from under me standing in my own kitchen. I saw that truck sitting open on the shoulder of a road I've driven 1,000 times, with something pacing me on both sides close enough to touch my tailgate, and I didn't stop. I told myself it was the smart thing to do, the safe thing, the only thing a sane man does at 11 at night, with two things he can't explain running alongside his truck. Maybe it was. I don't know anymore what the smart thing was. I just know Dean's truck was open and empty on that road, and I drove past it, and I want that on the record too, in order, exactly as it happened, because somebody is going to have to go back out there and look, and I need you to know precisely where to start. Carol, I need you to just listen for a second before you say anything, okay? I'm fine. I'm parked at the Pilot outside Weatherford, not the place I was. Doors locked, engine running, both mirrors lit up so I can see the whole lot from where I'm sitting. I needed somewhere with lights and people before I could even pick up the phone. 2 kids knocked on my door tonight and asked to come in, and I still don't know why I said no so fast. That's the part I can't put down, Carol. Not what they looked like. The saying no, before I even understood what I was looking at. You know the run, Amarillo to Springfield, same as always. I pulled off around 1:30 because my eyes were going, and I still had hours left on the clock I wasn't going to use tonight. Some truck stop off 40, one of those lots you drive past 100 times and couldn't tell anybody the name of the next morning. Maybe 8 rigs in there when I backed in, most of them dark, curtains up, everybody sleeping off their hours same as I was fixing to do. There was one flatbed trailer sitting off by the fence with no cab hooked to it at all, just sitting there disconnected, which I clocked and didn't think twice about, because you see that sometimes, a driver dropping a trailer and bobtailing off somewhere. I ate the sandwich you packed, radio on low, and I was out inside 20 minutes. I want you to know, none of this started strange. It started like every other night. I've done this for 11 years. Something knocked on my door around 3. 2 taps, soft, and my first thought, honest to God, was lot security doing rounds, or another driver needing a jump. So I sat up, cracked the curtain, and there's 2 kids standing right up against my door. A boy and a girl, maybe 9, 10 years old. No coats, just standing there with their hands down at their sides. And Carol, my first real thought, before anything else, was worry. Actual worry, like, whose kids are these? Where's their people? It's 40 degrees out and 1:30 in the morning off a interstate with 18-wheelers coming through at 70 miles an hour. That's the truth. I wasn't scared yet, but I looked past them for a car, a parent, headlights pulling out, anything, and there was nothing. Just the 2 of them standing there in that flat lot light, feet together, not shivering, not looking around the way a lost kid looks around. They were just facing my door, patient, like they'd been standing there a while already, and had all the time they needed. The girl spoke first, said could they come in, they needed a ride, real polite, real practice sounding, and the boy said the same thing, right on top of her, not quite together, maybe half a beat behind, so the words kind of layered over each other. And that's when I looked at their eyes, and there wasn't any white in them, no color, no pupil, just black, straight through, and under the lot lights, lights that were bright enough I could see every crack in the pavement. Their eyes didn't catch a bit of it. Nothing shined back. Here's the thing I need you to hear, Carol, because I've been turning it over for 40 minutes, and I still can't get it straight. I hit the master lock before I finished processing what I was looking at. My hand moved on its own. I didn't decide to be scared and then lock the door. My arm already had it done, and only after, my brain caught up and said, something's wrong with their eyes. That order's been eating at me worse than the eyes themselves. Like some part of me already knew before I did. I didn't say no right off. I just sat there with my hand on the lock and didn't answer. And the girl asked again. Exact same words. Exact same voice. No frustration in it. No kid whine. Nothing you'd expect if you told a real child no through a locked door. Just, could they come in? They needed a ride. Same cadence both times, like a recording playing twice. That's when I said no, out loud, through the glass, told them I couldn't help. They needed to find an adult inside, and neither one of them moved, or blinked, or changed their face at all. They just kept asking, 3, 4 more times, same exact words, same flat patience, like a phone menu looping, because you hadn't picked an option yet. I reached over for my phone on the dash, just to call the front desk of the stop, and it was maybe 2 seconds I looked away. When I looked back, the girl was still at my door, but the boy was gone from beside her, and I found him in my passenger mirror, already standing at the other door, not walking, not anywhere in between, already there, hand raised like he was about to knock on that side too. I didn't see him cross. There's 40 feet of open lot between where he'd have to walk, and I had eyes on that mirror the whole 2 seconds. Carol. He was just there. I turned the key to get out of there, and the engine caught rough, coughed twice, like it does in real cold, which it wasn't cold enough for, and my CB, which I hadn't even touched, kicked static, and under the static I swear I heard voices, more than 2, kids' voices, layered on top of each other saying something I couldn't pull apart, and it cut out the second the engine turned over clean. I didn't sit there to figure out what it was. I dropped it in gear, and pulled out of that lot faster than I've pulled out of anywhere in 11 years of driving. Checked my mirror, once I hit the frontage road, and standing way back near that disconnected flatbed trailer, past where the lot lights really reached, there was somebody else. Adult-sized, just standing, not doing anything, not waving, not walking toward the kids or away from them. I couldn't tell you a single detail about it, except that it was tall, and it was still, and it hadn't been there when I backed my rig in 5 hours before. I didn't stop to look twice. I got to this pilot, walked in shaking, and asked the kid behind the counter, real casual as I could manage, if he'd seen 2 kids wandering the lot tonight, a boy and a girl, no adult with them. And Carol, he didn't even look surprised. He just kind of nodded slow and said nobody'd come through his door in almost 2 hours but me. And then he said something I haven't been able to shake. He said, "That's the exit everybody talks about." And when I asked him what he meant, he told me about a driver a few years back who called in a strange knock, same as I'm describing to you, pulled off his route, and never made his delivery. Said the man's rig was found still running. Driver's door unlocked, nobody in it, out past that same stretch of 40. Said dispatchers still bring it up sometimes when a new driver reports something weird off that corridor. He wasn't laughing when he told me. He said it like it was just something everybody in this business already knew and didn't talk about outside the family. I called you the second I got back in the cab, and, Carol, I need to ask you something, and I need you to just answer me straight. You said, when I told you the part about their eyes, again, before you caught yourself. You said it under your breath, but I heard it. What do you mean, again? Because I don't remember calling you about anything like this before. Not once, not ever. And you're telling me this is the 3rd time this year I've called you sounding like this, and I don't remember the other 2. I need you to tell me what I said those other times, because I'm sitting here with no memory of them at all, and that scares me worse than anything that happened tonight. While you're finding your words, I pulled up my log, because something's been nagging at me since I got here. This feeling like more time passed back there than I've got accounted for. My ELDs got me stopped at that lot from 1:28 to 3:51. That's over 2 hours. Carol, I remember maybe 5 minutes at that window. 5 minutes, 10, at the outside. Not 2 hours. The system doesn't lie. It's tied to the engine. It logs itself. I didn't touch it. And it's telling me I lost the better part of 2 hours. I can't put anywhere. I keep running it forward. The knock, the eyes, the boy at the mirror, the drive out. And there's no way to stretch what I remember past 10 minutes. And there's an hour and 50 minutes sitting in that log with my name on it, and nothing in my head to fill it. I don't know what to do with that, Carol. I don't know what to do with any of this. I keep telling myself I'm gonna sit here till it's light out, drink this coffee, get my hours back, and finish the run like normal. Because what else is there? I keep telling myself the part that scared me was just instinct, some old animal thing in me that saw something wrong, shaped like a kid, and moved my hand before my brain got the memo. And that's a story I can live with. That's a story that makes me a guy who got spooked at a truck stop, not a guy something's been happening to 3 times this year that he can't remember. I'm gonna stay on the line with you a while if that's all right. I don't much want to hang up yet. I just want to hear you talk. Tell me about the kids. Tell me what Danny said at dinner. Anything. I don't care what. Hang on. Carol, hang on a second. Don't hang up. Just stay on the line. Don't say anything. Just stay on. There's something in the sleeper behind me. It just asked if it could come in. The coffee had gone lukewarm by the time Dale hit the on-ramp for 79 South, but he drank it anyway, because the alternative was falling asleep at mile marker 40, with 11,000 pounds of steel coil riding behind him. The wipers were on the slow setting, dragging themselves across the glass every 8 seconds or so, clearing a mist that wasn't quite rain and wasn't quite nothing. On the radio, a man was reading an ad for a mattress store in Clarksburg, something about a 4th of July sale that had clearly been recorded back in June and never pulled from rotation. Ordinary night, ordinary run. He'd picked up a hitchhiker 40 minutes back at the Flying J outside Sutton, a kid named Cody, maybe 22, backpack, 3-day beard, said he was trying to get down to Beckley to see his sister before she had her baby. Dale didn't usually stop for hitchhikers. Company policy said don't, insurance said don't, but the kid had that look, cold, thin jacket, standing under the pump lights like he'd been there a while, and Dale had a daughter about that age, so he'd waved him into the sleeper and told him to get some sleep. They had 4 hours yet. The fog started climbing up out of the hollows around Flatwoods, the way it does on that stretch when the temperature drops fast after a warm afternoon, and by the time he passed the Sutton exit, it wasn't patches anymore. It was a wall he was driving into, his high beams just bouncing the light back at him, so he had to run on lows. That was when he saw it the first time. Off on the shoulder, right where the guardrail gave way to tree line, something pale and low to the ground, folded up on itself like a man kneeling to tie his boot. His first thought was deer. The second thought was somebody's broken down, and this is them squatting by their car, and he even eased off the gas a little, scanning the shoulder for hazard lights. For a car. There was no car, just the shape, holding still in the wash of his headlights for the half second it took to pass it. And something about the proportions didn't sit right in his head. The way the arms looked too long for the body. The way it didn't have the low round hump of a deer's back but something narrower. Something with shoulder blades. He told himself it was the fog bending the light. He told himself a lot of things over the next 6 miles. He saw it again, just past the mile 60 marker. Same posture, same crouch, same angle, same pale color, like something that hadn't seen sun in a long time. And that's when the first real crack opened up in the ordinary night. Because Dale did the math without meaning to. 60 minus whatever the first one was. Call it 48. That's 12 miles. And he'd covered that distance in under 9 minutes doing 62 on the speedometer. No man on his feet crosses 12 miles of Appalachian tree line in 9 minutes. Not through brush and rock and drop-offs that steep. Somebody would have to be driving alongside him, pacing him, ducking in and out of the trees to set up the same picture twice. He actually laughed, a short, ugly sound in the cab, because the other explanation was worse, and he wasn't ready to sit with the other explanation yet. He grabbed the CB more out of habit than anything, needing another human voice in the cab. Breaker 19. Anybody out there past the Sutton cut? And for a few seconds, there was nothing but hiss. Then a voice came back, older, gravel in it, said he was eastbound, but he'd just come through there himself, and asked Dale straight out if he'd seen something on the shoulder. Dale said maybe, said he wasn't sure, and the old boy went quiet for a second before he said the thing that took the last bit of ordinary out of the night. Said whatever you do, don't slow down for it, and don't stop for it, no matter what it looks like it's doing, no matter if it looks hurt. Said men had gone quiet on their radios, on that exact stretch before, mid-sentence, and come morning their rigs were found pulled onto the shoulder, with the engines still running, and the doors standing open. Said the company never puts it in any report because who's going to write that down and keep his job? Said just get your speed up and don't look at it too long. It likes it when you look. Dale's hands had gone tight on the wheel somewhere in that transmission. He glanced at the little gap in the curtain behind him, wanting suddenly and badly to hear Cody snoring back there, some proof the world was still built the way he thought it was. But the curtain hung still, and he couldn't make himself reach back and check. Not with both hands full of a truck, doing 64 through fog he couldn't see 40 feet into. He pushed the pedal down instead. That felt like doing something. 2 miles on, he passed a sedan, nosed onto the shoulder gravel, hazards blinking that slow orange pulse into the mist, driver's door hanging open, the dome light throwing a weak little cone of yellow onto empty asphalt. No driver, no one standing near it, just a door left open, the way you leave a door open when you mean to be right back. Except however long ago that hazard light started blinking, nobody had been right back yet. Dale didn't slow down. He didn't let himself slow down. But something in his chest had gone cold and stayed cold, because now he had a picture to put with the old trucker's warning, an actual car with its door standing open in the fog, and it made the whole thing real, in a way the shape at the roadside hadn't quite managed on its own. He reached back, then couldn't help it, rapped his knuckles twice on the plywood divider by the curtain. "Hey, you good back there?" Nothing. He told himself the kid was just a hard sleeper, told himself that twice, and kept his foot down, and watched the fog roll off his hood in long gray sheets, and that's when it came up onto the hood. No warning, no shape at the roadside this time, no gap in the fog to see it coming. It was simply there, low and pale against the hood plating, close enough that his headlights lit the underside of it from a few feet away, close enough that he saw skin the color of a fish belly, stretched too tight over something with joints in the wrong places. Long fingers splayed flat against the metal, like it was feeling for a grip. Dale near put the truck into the guardrail. He stood on the brake for a half second out of pure animal reflex, before he remembered the old trucker's voice, and got his foot back on the gas. And in that half second of hesitation, the thing on the hood did something he hadn't braced for at all. It didn't come for the windshield. It didn't come for him. It turned its head, slow, deliberate, like it was checking something off a list, and looked past him, toward the back of the cab, and then it moved, quick and low, up over the hood, and along the driver's side, in one motion too smooth for the size of it, and he lost sight of it somewhere around the mirror. He was screaming something, he wasn't even sure what, both hands locked on the wheel, when he heard the tearing sound behind him, fabric giving way, and in his mirror, he caught the curtain whipping loose from its track, snapping out into the sleeper like something had come through the little vent window that was never big enough for a grown man to fit through. Not going 65. Not ever. He didn't stop. Every instinct in him screamed to pull over, and every warning he'd been given in the last 20 minutes screamed louder underneath it. Don't stop. Don't stop no matter what. And so he drove, shaking, past the tunnel lights at Flatwoods, past the fog line finally breaking up into clear black night, all the way to the truck stop lights at the Elkview exit before his hands would let go of the wheel. He sat there under the floodlights of the pumps for a long minute before he found the nerve to climb back and pull what was left of the curtain aside. The sleeper was empty. Cody's backpack was still there, zipped shut, sitting exactly where he'd set it down. His jacket was folded on the bunk like he'd taken it off to sleep. There was no blood, no torn seat, no broken window, nothing you could point to and call evidence. Just a vent window that shouldn't open from the outside, standing open about 4 inches. And a young man who no longer existed anywhere in that cab. Dale called it in from the truck stop payphone because his hands were shaking too hard to trust a cell signal, and the woman on dispatch told him gently, in the voice you use on somebody you already suspect has been awake too long, that there was no record of any hitchhiker, that company policy prohibited passengers, that maybe he should pull his log and get some sleep before he finished the run. He didn't argue. He hung up. And he sat in the cab of his truck under those lights until the sky started going gray, and he never told anyone the rest of it, which is that somewhere around 4 in the morning, out past the tree line at the edge of the lot where the floodlights gave up and the dark took back over, he saw it again, low, crouched, pale, not moving toward him this time, just watching, the way you watch to make sure a job's been finished. He still runs that stretch of 79 for a living, because a man has to eat, and he still keeps the coffee hot and the radio on for the company of it. But he doesn't pick up hitchhikers anymore. Not even in the rain. Not even for kids who look cold and tired and remind him of somebody's daughter. And on the nights the fog climbs up out of the hollows past Sutton, thick enough to eat his high beams whole, he keeps his eyes on the road and his foot steady on the pedal, because somewhere out past the guardrail, keeping perfect pace with his taillights whether he can see it or not, something is still checking to make sure he's driving alone. I don't have a name for what I saw, and that's the part that still gets me. Not the shape of it. Not even what it might have wanted, if it wanted anything. It's that when I try to describe it to anyone, I run out of words about 4 sentences in and start explaining it in terms of what it wasn't. That's not a description. That's a hole where a description should be, and I've been walking around that hole for 3 months now, still not sure how deep it goes. I was driving Route 6 out past Tonopah, heading toward Ely for a job hauling scrap, and it was one of those Nevada nights where the moon just doesn't show, not clouded over, just gone, like the sky forgot to schedule it. No traffic. I hadn't passed another set of headlights in 40 minutes. Just my high beams cutting a tunnel through the dark, and the AM radio fuzzing in and out between 2 stations that were both playing static, with occasional voices buried in it. About mile marker 14, give or take, I saw something at the edge of the shoulder. My first thought was deer, because that's always the first thought out there. Your brain is trained for deer. But it didn't have the right outline. It didn't have any outline, really. Not one that held still. When my headlights hit it, it didn't freeze the way an animal freezes, and it didn't bolt the way an animal bolts either. It just changed. Like it was made of something that responded to light instead of reflecting it, folding into itself and back out. And for 1 second, I could have sworn it had the rough shape of a person crouched down. And the next second, that was gone, and it was just mass. Just a dark, uneven pile of something that didn't sit right against the gravel. I blinked. Because your eyes do that, you don't choose it. And when I opened them again, the shape had changed a 3rd time. That's the detail people don't believe. But I'm telling you, every single time I blinked, it was different. Not moved. Different. I want to correct something I just said, actually, because I've told this part wrong before. I said I saw it once and drove past. That's not exactly true. I slowed down first. I actually slowed the truck down to look, because some idiot part of my brain needed to classify it, needed to put it in a box marked animal, or person, or trash bag caught on brush, and it wouldn't go in any box. So I sat there for maybe 4 or 5 seconds, with my foot easing off the gas, staring at a thing that was somehow always mid-transition, and then I did what any sane person does, which is stop looking and drive. I checked my mirror about 10 seconds later. Habit, nothing more. The kind of glance you do without deciding to. And it was there. Not receding into the distance behind me, the way the roadside would look if I'd actually passed something and left it there. It was close. Closer than physics should have allowed for something that doesn't have legs I could identify. Sitting almost dead center in my mirror, like it had crossed both lanes, in the time it took me to blink twice. I remember gripping the wheel and telling myself it was a trick of the mirror, some kind of afterimage burned onto my retina from staring too long. And I actually said that out loud in the cab, just to hear a voice that wasn't the radio static. Saying it out loud didn't help. It just confirmed I was scared enough to need to hear my own voice. I pulled into the next gas station I hit, which was maybe 18 miles up, one of those single-pump places with a hand-painted sign and a bell over the door that doesn't quite work anymore. I told the woman behind the counter what I saw. Not calmly. I was talking too fast, and I remember she didn't ask me to repeat myself, which should have told me something right away. She just reached under the counter, pulled out a spiral notebook that was more duct tape than cover at that point, and slid it toward me without a word. Pages of handwriting, dates, mile markers, one-line descriptions, most of them in different handwriting, which meant different people had been writing in that book for a long time. Shapeless mass, one entry said. Didn't look like anything, another said. One just said, saw it again, in handwriting that looked like it belonged to whoever wrote 3 entries above it, weeks apart. That's when the fear changed shape too, if I can put it that way. Up to that point, I thought I'd seen something. standing in that gas station with the bell not working right and her not blinking at my story. I understood I'd seen something that had a history, that other people had stood exactly where I was standing and had exactly this conversation, and that whatever it was had been doing this long enough to fill a spiral notebook that was falling apart at the spine. I asked her if anyone had ever gone back to look for it in daylight. She said people had. I asked if they found anything. She got quiet in a specific way, the way people get quiet when they're deciding how much to tell a stranger, and then she pointed at the door, taped next to the bell, faded almost past reading from sun through the glass, was a missing person flyer. A trucker, 41 years old, last seen, leaving that same station in October, 9 months before I ever drove that road. She said he'd told her almost the exact thing I just told her, word for word, close enough that it made the hair on my arms stand up, and he'd paid for his gas and pulled out of that lot, and nobody had heard from him since. His rig was found 4 days later, parked, engine off, keys still in it, 4 miles down the highway. Nothing else. No sign of a struggle. No blood. Nothing taken. I should have turned around right there. I know that now. But I had a delivery window and a boss who didn't care about ghost stories, and I told myself the flyer was a coincidence, that truckers go missing for 100 boring reasons that have nothing to do with anything on the side of the road. Debt, women, a new life somewhere nobody's looking. I got back in the truck and I kept driving, because that's what you do when you've got bills and a schedule. You decide the thing that scared you was probably nothing, because the alternative means changing your whole life around a shape you can't even describe. About 20 minutes past the station, it was in the road. Not the shoulder this time, the actual lane, standing there the way a rock slide would, something you have no choice but to stop for. I hit the brakes hard enough that my coffee went off the dash, and I sat there with the engine idling and the high beams locked on it, and for the first time, it didn't change when the light hit it. It held still, which was somehow worse, because it meant it had a choice about the changing, and it had decided to stop. I got out. I want to be honest that I don't fully understand why I got out, except that some part of me needed the not knowing to end more than it needed to be safe. I walked maybe 15 feet toward it with my phone flashlight shaking in my hand, and before I got close enough to see it clearly, the light just wasn't on it anymore. Not gone into the dark, not run off. The space where it had been was empty, like it had never been solid enough to leave the spot for me to catch up to. What was on the ground where it had been sitting was a boot. One work boot, laces still tied, like someone had stepped out of it without untying it first, which isn't really something a body does on its own. Next to it, a few feet off, a flannel shirt, torn at one shoulder seam, dropped flat, like it had just been let go, rather than pulled off in a struggle. I didn't touch either one. I stood there with my flashlight on them for longer than I want to admit, and the whole time I kept thinking about that notebook, about the trucker's rig found running with the keys still in it, and I understood, in a way I couldn't have explained to anyone standing in that gas station an hour earlier, that whatever this thing was, it wasn't hunting people the way an animal hunts. It was leaving what people were, the parts of them that were just clothes and boots and things a body doesn't need anymore, and taking the rest. I got back in the truck. I don't remember starting it. I don't remember pulling back onto the road. The next clear thing I have is the sun coming up over the hills east of Ely, and my dashboard clock reading almost 6 in the morning, and my delivery window having been 4 hours earlier that night, which meant somewhere between that boot on the ground and the sunrise, I lost close to 5 hours I cannot account for in any way. My phone had 11 missed calls from my dispatcher, and one voice memo I didn't remember recording, 40 minutes long, time-stamped for a stretch of that missing time. I made myself listen to it once. Most of it is static and engine noise, and my own breathing, too fast, too even, like someone trying to control it on purpose. About 31 minutes in, there's my voice, flat, almost bored, saying the same sentence over and over, low enough I had to turn the volume all the way up to catch it. It's you now. It's you now. It's you now. I don't remember saying it. I don't know who I thought I was talking to. Here's the part I keep circling back to, the part I can't get past no matter how many times I run it over. I told you earlier that it looked different every time I blinked, like it was always mid-change, and I was only ever catching it between shapes. I've thought about that more than anything else, lying awake at 3 in the morning turning it over, and I don't think that's what was happening anymore. I think it was matching me. I think every time I blinked, it moved, and the shape I caught it in wasn't random. It was whatever shape was left over from copying whatever I'd just done with my own body a half second before. My shoulders, my head tilt, the way I flinch. I think the reason nobody can describe it right is that it was never its own thing to describe. It was wearing pieces of whoever was looking at it, updating in real time, and none of us ever saw it clearly, because what we were actually looking at, for half a second at a time, over and over, was somebody who used to be standing where we're standing now. I finished the delivery. I got written up for the missed window, and I didn't argue it, because there wasn't a version of the truth I could put in an incident report that wouldn't get me sent for a psych eval. I drove home a different way, 4 hours longer, and I told myself I'd never take Route 6 after dark again, and I meant it when I said it. 2 weeks ago, my dispatcher called with a job that only made sense running that road at night, and I told him no, and he said fine. He'd send Danny instead. Danny took it. Danny called me from a gas station around 1 in the morning, and I could hear it in his voice before he even finished the sentence. That same fast talking, that same need to say it out loud to somebody. And he asked me if I'd ever noticed the mile markers, if I'd ever really looked at them, because his GPS had him at mile 14 for almost 6 minutes, without the number changing once. I told him to turn the truck around right now, and not stop until he saw lights he recognized. He said he would. That was 9 days ago. Nobody's heard from him since, and when I drove out there myself to look, hoping to God I was wrong about all of it, his rig was parked on the shoulder near mile marker 14, engine off, keys still in it, door hanging open like he'd stepped out mid-sentence, and just kept walking. I didn't get out to check for a boot. I already knew what I'd find, and I didn't want to be the one standing there when the light started changing shape again. You asked me back at the house why I never take Route 9 once it gets dark, and I brushed you off same as I always do, but we're on it right now. Rain coming down just like it was that night, so I reckon this is as good a time as any to finally tell you the whole thing. See that curve up ahead, past where the church sign is? That's Callahan's Curve. County's replaced that guardrail twice since I was your age, on account of how many cars have gone into that tree line over the years. The accident report from the spring of 1987 says a 19-year-old girl died right about where that leaning mailbox sits now, thrown clear of her car in a storm. And I'm telling you, 11 years after that report got filed, when I picked up a girl standing on that same shoulder, she was standing in that exact spot, to the foot, near as I ever figured out. I was 20 then, October of 98, coming off a double at the poultry plant outside town. Power had already gone out twice that week from storms rolling through, and this one was about the worst I'd seen. I came around that curve slow, wipers barely keeping up, and there she was on the shoulder, no coat, no umbrella, one shoe on and one gone. Back then, folks still stopped for people walking in weather like that without thinking twice, so I pulled over. She got in easy, said her name was Dana, said she needed to get up to 412 Milner, said she was running late for her sister's rehearsal dinner, and her sister was going to have her hide. She talked the way people do when they're used to strangers being decent to them. I noticed she wasn't shivering, soaked clean through in October like that, but I told myself some people just run warm. Then the small stuff started, the kind of thing you talk yourself out of one piece at a time. I had the heater blasting, and I could still see my breath. Figured the heater core was going. Made a mental note to look at it that weekend. The radio, which had been playing whatever was on the country station, warbled off into something older, all horns and static, like the dial had slipped on its own. I knocked the dash, and it cleared right up, so I let it go. What I couldn't let go was when she asked if the Sinclair was still open late, said she might stop, and get her sister some cigarettes. I told her that Sinclair had closed down when I was still in grade school. She looked at me like I was the one confused, said she'd bought gas there Tuesday. I didn't argue with her, I just kept my eyes on the road and felt something pull tight behind my ribs that I didn't have a name for yet. Came up on a possum in the road, past the old feed store, and swerved wide to miss it. And when I glanced back over to check on her, the seat was empty. Seatbelt still buckled across nothing. Door handle hadn't moved. I'd have felt that latch through the whole frame of the truck, same as you feel any door open. Window was still fogged over on the inside. Not one handprint on the glass. I hit the brakes hard enough to nearly put myself in the ditch. Sat there in the middle of Route 9 with the hazards going, calling her name out into the rain like a fool. Nothing out there but the storm, and my own truck idling. I don't remember much of the drive after that, just that my hands wouldn't quit shaking on the wheel. I pulled into Sully's, the all-night diner off Main, because I needed to be around people and bad coffee and lights that worked right. Must have looked like I'd seen my own funeral, because the waitress asked what happened, before I'd even sat down. I told her, faster and messier than it needed telling, about the girl and the seatbelt and the empty seat. There was an old man at the counter, Otis Vance, somebody I only half knew from the feed store, and he didn't look up from his coffee the whole time I talked. When I finished, he turned his head and asked, calm as anything, what she looked like. Not if I'd been drinking, not if I was pulling his leg, just what she looked like he already had the answer sitting there and only needed me to say it first. I told him, dark hair, maybe 5'4", a little gold cross on a chain. He was nodding before I got to the necklace, said, and one shoe, I expect, before I'd mentioned that part either. Then he told me her name was Dana Calloway, 19, and she'd died right at Callahan's Curve in April of '87, driving home in a storm from her own sister's bridal shower. Said I wasn't the first one to give her a ride on that stretch of road, and I wouldn't be the last. What he said after that is the part that stuck with me longest. He said the wreck wasn't only her doing. Said something ran her off that curve that night, another vehicle, and whoever was driving it never stopped, never once came forward, and the case sat open for years, with nobody in the sheriff's office able to close it out. Said people around here had their suspicions about who it might have been, but suspicion never turned into proof, and eventually folks just stopped saying it out loud. I went home and told your grandmother Louise the whole thing, mostly because I needed somebody to tell me I'd imagined it, or dreamed it, or drunk one too many of those energy drinks on shift. Instead, she went white as the tablecloth and dropped the dish towel right there on the kitchen floor, told me, in a voice I'd never once heard out of her, that we were not going to say that name in her house again. Then she walked out of the room before I could ask her why. Took me the better part of a year to work up the nerve to bring it up again, and when I finally did, gentle as I knew how, she told me Dana Calloway was her younger sister, my aunt, a woman I had never once heard mentioned in 20 years of living under that roof, because after the funeral, your great-grandparents pulled every photograph of her out of every album, stopped marking her birthday on the calendar, stopped saying her name at supper, until it was like she'd never been born at all. Louise said grief that big, in a house that small, either gets spoken or it gets buried, and her family chose burying it. For 20 more years, I let the rest of it lie. Every now and then, I'd think back on Otis saying the case never closed, and I'd wonder same as everybody else in town did. But I never asked Louise straight out, and she never offered. Not until your grandfather Earl passed, 4 years back now. About 6 months after the funeral, she sat me down at that same kitchen table and told me the part she couldn't have said, with him still breathing in the next room. Told me it was Earl, driving the truck that clipped Dana's car that night, and never stopped. 22 years old, hauling feed for the co-op in a storm, took that curve too fast, panicked, and kept on driving instead of pulling over. Said he confessed it to her himself, years after, once the two of them had already fallen for each other, and the guilt got too heavy for one man to carry alone in the dark. Said she thought about going to the sheriff more times than she could count, and loved him anyway, and stayed anyway, and buried that truth right alongside her sister's memory. Said she could only say any of it out loud to me now, because there wasn't a living man left for it to hurt. So there it is. 28 years I've driven this road since that October night, slowing down at this curve every single time, and more nights than I'd like to count I've caught a shape, standing on that shoulder in bad weather, same spot, same posture, gone soon as the headlights swept past. Never once stopped again, until tonight, because there she is right now, up ahead, Same as always. I'm pulling over this time. I'm going to get out in this rain and say her name. And I'm going to say the thing nobody in this family had the nerve to say out loud in 39 years, which is that we know what happened to her, and we're sorry, and not 1 second of it was ever her fault. You stay in the truck. This part's mine to finish. And when I got back in, soaked clean through and quiet, you asked me why your grandmother fought so hard to name you Dana when you were born, over my objections, telling everybody it was on account of some old hymn she favored. I never once corrected that story, but you know the truth of it now, same as I finally do, and I think that's exactly why she picked it. I still hear her before I hear anything else on the radio. That's the truth I lead with now, because it's the only part of this people believe right away. The rest, they have to sit with a while. I was 26 the first time, driving a bucket truck for the electric co-op, running a call-out on a transformer that had tripped somewhere past the county line. 2 in the morning, first week of a dry August. The kind of heat that doesn't break even 6 hours after the sun's gone down. The road dips to cross Perdita Creek on a low-water crossing. No rails, just concrete, poured flush with the bank. Built cheap, back in the 50s, because nobody figured the creek would ever come up fast enough to matter. That night, the water was maybe 8 inches deep. Slow, the color of coffee, with cream stirred into it under my headlights. I had the windows down, because the AC in that truck had quit, sometime around Reagan's second term, and that's how I heard it, under the static, under the hum of tires on wet concrete. A crying, not screaming, crying, low and even, the kind that's gone on so long the person doing it has forgotten how to stop. I eased off the gas without meaning to. There she was, maybe 30 feet off the passenger side, standing where the bank goes soft. In something white, the humidity had pasted flat against her like a wet bedsheet. My high beams caught her for a second and a half. I want to say she turned toward the truck. I've told this story enough times now that I don't fully trust that detail anymore, but I remember believing it that night. I did what anybody from around here will tell you they'd never do, and then does anyway. I crossed the bridge, found a wide spot past the cattle guard, and circled back with my brights up on that same stretch of bank. Nothing. No white dress. No footprints heading for the road. No sign a person had stood there breathing 5 minutes before. What I did find, right where the mud turns to gravel, were footprints. Bare, small, a woman's stride, walking straight into the water and just stopping. Not turning around. Not coming out the other side. Stopping, like whoever made them had kept walking, after her feet quit leaving marks. I didn't tell anybody that morning. I told them at lunch, the way you tell a joke on yourself, already smiling before the punchline lands. Bettina, who'd run dispatch out of that same double-wide office for coming up on 30 years, didn't laugh. Didn't even look up from her crossword. She asked me what mile marker, and when I told her, she nodded the way you nod at the price of diesel going up again. Perdita Creek's been doing that since before I had this job, she said. Ruben's daddy saw her. Old man Caceres saw her twice. Something cold went through my chest that had nothing to do with the office AC. Because up until that sentence, some part of me still needed this to be a private, foldable kind of crazy. Something I could quietly decide had been a trick of heat and static. Bettina took that away from me in about 4 words. This wasn't mine. This was a fact of the county, filed somewhere between the school bus routes and the burn ban, and everybody older than me already knew it. I started paying attention after that, which is its own kind of admission. I noticed the nights I heard her weren't just any nights. They were always nights the gauge at that crossing read low, sometimes bone dry upstream, and always, without fail, a day or 2 before a real storm rolled up out of the Gulf. I checked this against my own call-out logs for better than a year before I said a word to anyone, because I didn't want to be the guy who'd turned a ghost story into a spreadsheet. But there it was, every time. Old-timers had a saying I'd heard my whole life, without really hearing it. She cries loudest, right before the water rises. I'd always taken that for the kind of thing people say about weather, like counting cricket chirps for temperature. It had never once occurred to me it might be literal. That's what sent me to the newspaper archive at the library in town. A low brick building that still kept the county's old papers on microfilm nobody had bothered digitizing. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I found it anyway, on a spool from 1967. A flash flood that took a car off that same crossing. A young mother and 3 kids. On a night neighbors later said they'd heard crying, carried on the wind for the better part of an hour, before the water came up, and nobody had thought to move their trucks off the low ground. The paper didn't print anything about a woman in white. It didn't need to. Everybody reading it in 1967 already knew what that crying had meant. Same as Bettina knew it in her double wide 40 years later. What the paper printed, in that flat way newspapers state a fact and let the reader do the grieving, was that the family had been warned and had crossed anyway. I told my cousin Mikey about all this over beers, mostly to watch his face do something, and instead he laughed at me the specific way men laugh when they've decided a story is an insult to their nerve. Mikey worked seismic survey crews, spent half his life alone in the brush at odd hours, and he took my creek story as a personal dare. 2 weeks later, he drove out to Perdita Creek by himself, at 2 in the morning, parked on the bridge, and waited. I know, because he texted me a photo of his dashboard clock, time-stamped, and the next morning texted nothing happened. We're an old lady. Then he went quiet for about a day and a half. When he finally called back, he didn't sound like Mikey. He remembered parking on the bridge. He remembered the crying starting, closer than mine had ever gotten, right up against the driver's door. And then the next thing he had any memory of at all was standing waist-deep in the creek at 4 in the afternoon, his truck still idling up on the bridge with the door hanging open, and no memory of the 11 hours in between. He hasn't talked about it since. He also hasn't made fun of me about that creek one time since. That scared me enough to finally do something I'd been putting off for years, which was drive out to see Doña Fina, who lived off the Caliche Road past the old gin, and who half the county still went to see for things doctors in town didn't have a pill for. I expected her to hand me the standard version, the one everybody already knows without ever being taught it. A woman drowned her own children out of spite or grief, and now walks the water looking for them, taking whoever she finds instead. She let me get about halfway through my own version before she stopped me. That's the part people keep, she said, because it's the part with a villain in it. Easier to live next to a monster than next to a mistake. What she told me instead was longer and messier, and didn't have a clean shape to it at all. That crossing had been taking mothers and children back before anybody could put a first name to the woman in the old newspaper. That every family for 3 generations who'd tried to beat rising water across that low bridge with kids in the truck had added their own crying to whatever was already down there, until nobody left alive could tell you whose grief you were even hearing anymore. It wasn't one woman's story. It was every one of them, folded down into a single sound. I was ready to leave with just that. A bigger, sadder version of the same ghost story, until Doña Fina asked me, almost like an afterthought, how old I'd been when I went in the water myself. I told her she had me confused with somebody else. She looked at me the way you look at a kid, about to tell you the dog ate his homework, and said my name, my father's name, and a year, flat, like she was reading it off something. I want to tell you it came back to me clean right there in her kitchen, but the truth is, it surfaced in pieces over the following week, the way a smell can bring a whole afternoon back before you've placed it. I was 4. My father's truck had stalled halfway across that same low crossing during a rise, at night, with me in the cab. I have exactly one true memory of my own from that night. Water at the window glass, warm, not cold the way you'd think, and then nothing, until I was on the bank in somebody's arms that wasn't my father's. I called my mother that same night, which I almost never do after 9, and asked her flat out who pulled me out of the water when I was 4. She went quiet long enough I thought the call had dropped. Then she told me the part of the story my father had spent 30 years refusing to tell at family gatherings. The part he'd cut off with a look if anybody brought it up. He'd gotten out of the stalled truck to try and push it, and by the time he looked back for me, I was already on the bank, dry-mouthed and shaking, a good 20 feet from where the truck had gone under to the floorboards. He never saw who carried me there. Nobody did. What he did see, and told my mother once, and only once, was a woman in something white, walking away from the bank, back toward the water, not toward the road, where anybody living would have gone. He moved us off that side of the county, within the year. He never let me ride with him on a night crossing again, as long as he was alive. My mother had assumed I already knew all of it. I'd spent 20-some years assuming I'd simply been lucky. Knowing that changed how I listened to her, if you can call it listening. I went back through my call-out logs again, except this time, I wasn't checking her against the water gauge. I was checking her against what happened after. Every single night I'd heard that crying at Perdita Creek, or any of the other low crossings in our service area. Something had gone wrong within the hour that a person could have died in. A drunk driver who missed the turn onto the bridge by 4 feet and put his truck in the bar ditch instead of the creek. A family from out of state, camper trailer, stalled dead center of the crossing with 2 kids asleep in the back seat, who I happened to find because I was already out there. A woman walking home from a shift at the truck stop who'd started to take the low road as a shortcut and turned back for no reason she could put words to, except that something about it had felt wrong. Every time, I'd been within a few minutes of somebody who needed to not be where they were. I stopped thinking of the crying as something happening to me and started thinking of it as something being handed to me. The night it mattered most, I was running a call-out on a downed line about a mile past the crossing, first band of a storm already spitting rain sideways, and the crying started before I'd even reached the bridge, closer and more frantic than I'd ever heard it, right up against the guardrail that isn't really a guardrail. I came around the bend with my brights up, and there was a sedan sitting dead center of the low crossing, hazards blinking weak under 6 inches of water that I already knew from the radio traffic was about to become 16 inches inside the hour. I got the driver's door open myself, because the woman inside had that particular stillness people go into when they've decided moving might make it worse. 2 kids in the back, both awake, both quiet in that same frozen way. I got all 3 of them up onto my truck bed and off that crossing with maybe 20 minutes to spare before the water came up over the road, high enough that a car that size wouldn't have held against it. The mother kept thanking me for finding them so fast, out there, in weather like that, at that hour, on a road she said she hadn't even meant to be on. She never once mentioned hearing any crying at all. As far as she knew, it had just been me, alone, pounding on her window in the rain. I went back down to the water's edge after the tow truck had the sedan and the family was settled with the deputy, who'd finally made it out. I don't fully know why I went back, except some part of me wanted to say something, even if I didn't have the first idea what. The rain had led up to a drizzle. For about as long as it takes to blink twice, my headlights caught something at the far edge of the water. Not the full shape I'd seen at 26, just enough of a face turned halfway toward the truck for me to feel, more than see, that I recognized it. It wasn't a stranger's face, and it wasn't young. Doña Fina had shown me a photograph once, cracked down the middle, of her own grandmother standing at a wedding sometime in the 30s, and there was something in that half second by the water that sat in the same place in my memory as that photograph did, without my being able to tell you honestly if it was the same woman, a relation of hers, or just every grandmother in 3 generations of this county, wearing one face by now. She didn't wait around for me to work it out. By the time I blinked, the bank was empty again, same as it had been at 26, same as it probably had been for 100 years, of somebody standing right where I was standing, trying to decide if they'd really seen anything at all. I'm 41 now, still with the co-op, still running night call-outs more often than a man my age probably should. I've got a daughter, Elena, 7 years old, who thinks the low water crossing on Perdita Creek is the best part of any drive because her daddy always slows down there and rolls the windows down, rain or shine, and lets her point a flashlight at the bank like we're looking for deer. I've never told her why. I don't plan to. Not yet. Maybe not for years. The same way my own father never told me. What I can tell you, and this is the part I still turn over more than any other piece of it, is that in 7 years of slowing down at that crossing with my daughter buckled in next to me, I have never once heard crying. Not a note of it. I hear it plenty of times alone. Still do. The same low sound under the static that started all this half a lifetime ago. But whatever's down there at Perdita Creek, whatever's been down there since long before my father's time, has never once made a sound with my little girl in the truck. I used to think that meant it simply wasn't there those nights. I've come around, slowly, to a different way of thinking about it. I think when Elena's riding with me, whatever's watching that water can see for itself. The child in the truck is already safe, already looked after, already exactly where she needs to be, and doesn't have one reason left to cry about it. Some nights, driving home past 2 in the morning with my daughter asleep against the window, I roll the glass down anyway, just to check. And some nights, just for a second before I hit the gas again, I could swear I hear something out there that isn't crying at all. It's closer to a woman humming, low, the way you'd hum to get a child back to sleep.